All right, welcome to Old School with Patrick Rooney, Natural Health, Success, and Freedom. And I've got three great guests on today. We are going to do kind of a post-mortem breakdown on the John West recall. And for those of you who may not be watching the news carefully in Josephine County, the recall was yes, meaning he was successfully recalled almost by a 2-to-1 margin, which was a little bit shocking to me, but that's what happened. And we're going to break this thing down for you in hopefully a fairly easy fashion so we can find out what went wrong here for the conservative side of things, for the pro-freedom side of things, and what we can hopefully do to fix it going forward. So let me bring my guests on. And here we go. All right, guys. Here we go. All right. We've got Richard Emmons from the Oregon Eagle. He's the editor and publisher. We've got Brian J. Pombo, who has almost a lifetime in politics. And we have Mike Jones, who is a political animal and has done a political show even on a daily basis in Grants Pass, Josephine County area. So we got the right guys on today. So I want to ask you guys, and the ground rules are pretty simple. We might go over each other a little bit as one person talks or whatnot. Don't worry about that. I want to get your guys' opinions out there. I want to hear from you. How do you saw this election? What you gathered from it. We've had a few days now to let it kind of percolate, and I want to get right on that. So again, why did John West lose the recall election is pretty much what we want to focus in on. And that was in Josephine County. John West is a commissioner. There's 3 commissioners here. He's conservative. I would call him, in a simplified way, I'd call him kind of a Trump of Josephine County kind of guy, maybe with his personality. Maybe not everybody likes him. But as far as I know, he seemed to be doing the job for the taxpayers of this county, and he went in there to kind of bull in the china shop, look at what government was doing to the people. How can we save money? How can we streamline things? And how can we make government work for the people of Josephine County? To my mind, that's what he's been doing. There was a recall that may be considered a lot of personal stuff thrown in. I'm going to get to that. What was the reason for this recall? And why did it end up being a yes vote, which knocked him out of office by a lot? And Richard, I heard you the other day on a local show, radio show. What is the gentleman's name that has a local
Bill
show?
Meyer.
Yeah, Bill Meyer.
Bill Meyer. And you were saying some things, and a couple of things right out the bat here. Turnout for this election. 31% of the total people who could have voted in this election voted. I mean, we could almost stop the show right here, right? Horrible turnout.
Yeah, and I would suggest that the people that voted, period, were the motivated voters.
Bingo.
And this is a big. I'd love to see the breakdown as to party, which percentage of voters were from what party. That would be interesting. But it is by no means a verdict that represents the whole of the county. And
20%, and you said this, Richard, the other day, 20% of the actual voters voted yes. So 20% of the actual voters in Josephine County had the power to knock out a elected member here. That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, and that's how it works. We can talk about what went wrong with the recall, but taken from another vantage point, from the standpoint of the people that put on the recall, if you reverse engineer what they did, and with whether that was the Democrat leaders along with the chief petitioners, they timed it beautifully so that the election would happen, during Christmas time,
yes,
after the November election, special election. So people generally, voter turnout is very low. for special elections or recall elections. And the people that had an axe to grind with John West, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or NAVs, they were motivated to vote. And the Republicans that would have voted for him, let's say 2 years from now, hypothetically, they didn't even bother to vote. He's 2
Was it
years
time like
into.
this, Richard, on purpose, would you say,
Oh, absolutely.
during the holidays?
Absolutely. Anytime you want to pass a new tax district or major levy, you want to do it not on a major election, not when the governor's on the ballot or when the president of the United States is on the ballot, because that's when voter turnout is the highest. And this is a case of getting a very low turnout. I mean, less than 31% bothered to vote. And, that's how they did it. They were able to put out various allegations about John West. And as like Mike knows it wasn't like a black and white, John West was convicted of embezzling money from the county. And
Right.
he's a convicted criminal and we need to recall him. It wasn't like that at all. It took hour and a half, 2 hour video interviews to go through the 6 allegations, several of which had sub allegations, for each one. And that
none of
just makes
those.
it really hard to defend yourself because, it's kind of like advertising, the old thing, you throw enough spaghetti up against the wall and some of it just might stick.
Well, isn't that the point, right? I mean, to put a bunch of allegations, which none of them have been proven to be true, as far as I know, none of them proven to be true, but there's a whole bunch of them, and you get people to look at, wow, look at all these allegations. I mean, this guy must be guilty of something. There's, all these allegations sitting there.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and I tend to think that Democrats are what made this happen, generally speaking, in Josephine County. And there were some Republicans that probably caved to the sheer size. I mean, if you go and look at their website, they had the reasons why.
Hmm.
It's 13 pages and so people think, my God, look at all this stuff. This must be substantive. But an awful lot of
But
people.
it wasn't just the Democrats, because we did some calls on behalf of the Republican Party. And you could sense a certain, with most of the calls that you'll make will go to voicemail and all that.
Yeah,
But you can
yeah,
sense
they were.
with
There
some
were
of the
some
people that
Republicans that
answer,
were taken in by it, no
that
question.
you could sense not only would people tell you sometimes, but what they wouldn't tell you sometimes, you could almost hear it in what they wouldn't tell you in their attitude. Once you brought up what you were talking about, they
For
were
sure.
pretty much sold, a lot of them too. I don't know what the percentage was by party. Would we know that? We would know that, right,
I
Richard?
had those numbers, but not for the last day, not for Tuesday's results. Uh, Voter turnout was okay for Republicans and it was good for Democrats, but the Republican Party in Josephine County is somewhat divided. You had people making calls from whether they're officially part of the Republican Women's Club of Josephine County, because I was told directly from people making calls for the Republican Party of Josephine County that they would call and they'd say, well, somebody already called me and they are telling me that I should vote yes. So
Oh, really?
so phone calls were going out saying, hi, we're calling from the Republican Party.
Wait. They were saying they were
Right.
calling from the Republican Party and then telling them to vote yes?
Well, I suspect what happened, and Richard just alluded to it, was that they were calling from the Republican women's group,
Mm.
and people just interpreted that as the Republican Party is calling me, because the Republican Party women's group was part of the core of this recall.
Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't realize that.
yeah.
And so the Republican women's group was behind this. Holy shamoly. That's a
Yeah,
whole other thing I didn't realize.
there was Bill Hunker, who is fairly well known in Republican Party circles, and his wife is involved in the Republican Party women's group, Nancy Traherne, a few others, and they were firmly on the recall side. and
Really?
were publicly
Wow.
pushing for it. Yeah.
What did these people tend to be ticked off about the most that you guys were hearing? I mean, I know that there was the library, there was the pipe fork thing, there was the the 4-H, there was
Yeah.
the OSU. It's all kind of
Yeah,
some
the
of that's mixed
OSU and the
together.
4-H are the same thing.
Mixed together.
Actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were they most ticked off about?
Well, actually, you know what? There is a bit of a brilliance in how they put this together, because they put together loud constituent groups.
Mm.
They're the pipe fork people. You got something having to do with a pipe fork, you can pack a commissioner meeting with loud militant people. If you threaten the library in any way, or there's some big library issue, those people show up in force.
Right. And let's just say, Mike, by the way, as we're talking, so we don't get too inside baseball here. And I don't want, again, we're not going in the weeds, but at least people should have some idea. Pipe Fork was a property that some environmentalists wanted to purchase, I believe, so that they could kind of leave it alone, so to speak, and it would be like an environmental refuge or whatever. But it had some connection to water, which I didn't quite understand. But that's what it was. And then they said that John West was unfair, that he supposedly had property that bordered it, which he didn't. He sold, apparently. But it sounded like they were. There was a lot of that. Would seem like to me, I was hearing a lot about Pipe Fork, and people were really ticked off. More about that maybe than others. That's the way I was hearing it.
Not necessarily. I mean, that was one element. But like I said, it was a brilliant thing to put these vocal constituent groups together and use that as a part of the recall. And it made it a more powerful message to people that they were trying to convert to.
How much of this you guys think had anything to do with Trump just getting in power, and a lot of the people are ticked off about? Obviously, a lot of the left is ticked off about Trump being in power. How much of that is like a payback for the Trump election?
Well, this was already in play before the election.
Yeah.
So I mean, this had been growing over months and months and months. I had heard about the pipe fork thing at the beginning of the year. They had started going around to the different Rotary groups and so forth and bringing this stuff up. The discussion over who was going to be in charge of this recall thing was happening very early on. So I don't think it's directly tied. And you had not a lot. You had a handful of well-known people that were Trump supporters also supporting the recall.
Okay. So before we go further, I just wanted to mention that some of this is going to be in court. And you alluded to this, Richard, the other day, Bill Meyer. When they got the signatures for this, they're supposed to be, according to my understanding of there's a state law that says you're supposed to check 100% of the signatures. And in reality, 10%, which is a huge difference between 100 to 10%. How do you get 10% of something checked that's supposed to be 100% checked?
Okay, I was in the courtroom on Wednesday morning and heard the hearing, heard the evidence presented on both sides. This is an example of the way state laws are written, that a plausible case could be made in either direction. The multi-decade precedent is that you would verify 100% of the signatures using a statistical sampling method. And instead of it just saying that, the plain language said 100% of the signatures will be verified.
Really?
So that's what it said, and the language came out of the 1978, and that in the mid 70s there were a number of frivolous recall campaigns that went on, and they wanted to tighten things up, and that was one of the arguments made. It didn't carry enough water with the judge, but the judge, you look at the language, it said 100% in section 1, but then section 2 says you go to the law, ORS 250.105, and then it says down in the middle of that you use a statistical sampling.
So it referred to the statistical sampling somewhere in there.
Yeah, and Bill Meyer was talking about this morning and saying that the language there had a lot to do with at some time in the history here, they were attempting to recall some liberal judges. This is when the 100% sample, the 100% signature verification came in, and so I guess it depends on whose ox is being gored.
Wait. So when they were trying to recall liberal judges, they went by the standard of 100% to make it hard to get them rid of them. And in this case, they flipped it and went to a 10% statistical model.
I don't know about that. What I know is that that's how the 100% language originally got in. Now, we have had recent recalls in Josephine County history where the 10% sample has been used, and it's held up. Of course, it hasn't been. I don't think it's been challenged either. So we'll see what happens.
And how many signatures did they need to get? Does anybody know offhand?
Roughly 6,400.
Yeah, right.
And I think 6,445. They got about 7,200. So they checked 720 signatures. 37 of them didn't pass muster, but enough of them did, so that 10% was a valid sampling. So when you think about it, the number that they need to get, verified was 15% of the number of voters in Josephine County in the last governor's election in 2022.
Okay.
So you take 10% of 15%. So basically 1.5% of the people that voted in the last governor's election are enough to have this election happen.
And then 20%, it kind of works with the 20% that voted for. Maybe they did have enough because 2-1, they voted this thing as a yes.
Richard, is that the 1.5% of the people who voted in the last governor's election in Josephine County or statewide?
In Josephine County, whatever the district is, that's where they go. If it was, I imagine if there was a state rep, they'd say, well, how many people within that, state rep district voted for any candidate for governor? So basically, you're taking 10% sampling. Now, if that 10% sampling turned out that, a higher percentage weren't valid, then they'd take another sampling and then another sampling, but they stopped counting, or rather they stopped verifying signatures when that statistical sample is validated, and then they stop.
Okay. In any case, it's interesting. It's probably nothing's going to be overturned here anyway, based on this, I would guess. I'm going to get into, which I think is a real juicy part of this, which is who is involved behind this thing? What's the motivation of the people behind this thing? So were there, I know Lily Morgan, and there was a couple of petitioners, and she is the city manager in Gold Hill, I think is that correct? Mm-hmm. And I have heard that she has had kind of a bumpy ride there, that there's a lot of stuff there, maybe questionable stuff, I don't know, but there's a lot there, and that originally some people wanted to bring her over to Grants Pass to be the city manager, because we just had they were going to put in a ballot measure to make a city manager go over basically run everything, who's not elected, I understand, and go from 3 commissioners to, I think it was 7 or something like that.
Yeah, that was a county. That was a county-wide thing. You're talking about 17-1116, and that failed by an 80-20 margin, I believe, in May. And listen, I think this the recall is an outgrowth of that. They had plans to basically, how the Democrats have been threatening to pack the Supreme Court.
Yes,
they were wanting to pack the Board of Commissioners, and then they were, I'm sure, quite hopeful that Pat Fahey and Colleen Martin were going to win and be the ones who picked the 3rd commissioner, and then they would have effectively taken over the board at that point.
Interesting. So would you call this Does it look like more of a power play for this particular reason, mixed in with maybe some personal? I had heard that there was a personal thing between Lily Morgan and John West going back and forth for a
Years.
while.
Yes.
So, how much is a
I,
personal issue, and how much is this a power play to uh, essentially keep the state with more control over this county versus people that want county level control?
I agree with your original assessment there that it's is a combination of both. It was easier to get Lily Morgan on board because of her history with John West. But ultimately, this was a power play. And I covered Josephine County politics for like a year and a half. We did a nightly show, and
Mm,
I mean 7 days a week nightly show. So I became very familiar with how Josephine County politics works, and I'm assuming that most counties and most cities are pretty much the same in the respect that the permanent employees basically kind of run the show,
mm,
and they want people in the elected positions that are amenable to what they want, and
yes.
and it became very very clear. And listen, uh, Jay Meredith even said in a recent podcast on the Oregon Great podcast that if Herman Bershiger was not being rotated out in January, he would have been a subject of a recall as well.
Right.
So, and these are rock rib conservatives. They were threatening government insiders to the extent that that they wanted to examine what positions were actually necessary, what departments could be combined, uh, get the possibility of getting rid of superfluous managers,
Hmm.
which earned like $200,000 a year. I mean, that's what the cost is after health insurance and all costs that are incurred by having an employee. And they were doing this sort of thing, and that was a threat to the inside. Really, most of the ethics claims against John West were done by people inside county government or you know. Uh, Employees that left that either quit or left under bad terms.
Okay. So how many roughly county employees are there in Josephine? Anybody?
450.
450?
Yeah.
So even if I'm not saying you're wrong here, but there's something that had to transfer to the public, because even if 450 people vote, it's obviously not enough to win. And then there's other people, there's unions, right? There's government unions at play here, right?
Mhm.
Uh, are those statewide unions we're talking about mostly, or other unions too?
Yeah. I don't really
Anybody?
know.
I don't know if they're public sector unions that represent state and local county, city
Okay.
employees. Mhm.
Which brings on the old, I think it was FDR, who even FDR, with all of his big governments, said that public sector unions are bad, right? I mean, because you're kind of like,
Yeah.
what's the word? You're kind of negotiating against yourself and the people. It's I can't think of the term here, but it ain't right.
No, it's like a moral hazard in that the the unions get to make campaign contributions to
Mm,
elect the leaders that will be supposedly on the other side of the negotiating table.
Yes.
And then there are union rules in contracts that don't allow them to strike, but if they can't come to terms, then it goes to Salem and the ruling is made up there. So if you oppose the unions locally, most likely it goes to mediation and then it goes against the county. So, I don't have an axe to grind with unions in the private sector.
right.
FedEx and Amazon aren't unionized, and the Postal Service and UPS are unionized. There's competition there. and they're all trying to, literally deliver the goods at a reasonable price.
Yeah.
But it's just not the case, when it comes to city, county, federal, and local and county, that you just have that, you don't have the normal competition. There's zero marketplace competition.
So even that all being said, they still had to translate that to people who weren't working for the county, weren't in a union, to vote yes. And we kind of covered some of this already, but is it as simple as the way they did it, when they did it, all of the things that they threw up that were charges that weren't proven to be true, but nobody read that far, then saying, we got all this stuff here, go to our website and get a whole bunch more. We're just going to inundate you with a bunch of information. Does that kind of thing, is it just that works on the average person?
Best time to beat Republicans, or in this case, just a conservative wing, best time to beat them is directly after a victory. Conservatives don't like politics.
Yes.
And they stay away from it until they're angry enough to do something.
Everyone's pointing, see?
Yeah. He's totally right.
As soon as they win, they run away as quickly as possible, and they
that is
shut
so
their ears
true.
and they turn off their
Can I do
phones.
2 fingers pointed at you?
Well, that's what happened. Whether it was intentional enough is irrelevant. It was brilliant. It was brilliantly executed. They had people out for anybody that travels through Grants Pass on a regular basis. They had petitioners out all the time, rain or shine, great big signs, screaming ladies. And it was effective because you saw an irate negative side. And you did not see, other than signs, you did not see visibly, and the phone calls that happened for a short period of time. You didn't see much coming from the other side. I'm not sure if any mailers were sent out. I didn't receive any.
I don't think so.
I mean, just in terms of campaigning, that would have been extremely helpful. Is a very clear statement from the party or what have you. But brilliantly executed. Very well done. But with that, that's why you end up with a very low turnout, because people were done. They turned off. Trump won. I'm done. I'm going home.
If I might butt in on the end of that, I just want to buttress his point a little bit in that most people who are deeply heartfelt conservatives were building the pressure up to November 5th for 2 years in advance of this election. And it was such a cathartic win. We just went, politics, shelf.
Yep.
Let me step in. Let me step in.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
There was a very important mailer that went out for this campaign. It went to every single voter in the county, and that is the ballot. And when you look at the ballot, it listed out the 6 allegations of the chief petitioner, right?
Great point.
And beneath that, it had what John West submitted as his what's known as a letter of justification, because once they get enough signatures to qualify, he has 7 days to resign. If you're a convicted criminal, you might just resign. But if you feel that you have every right to remain in office and you want to stand before the voters, then you put in your letter of justification. That's what was John's defense. So when people are opening their ballots and they're like, wait a minute, I thought we just voted. Why are they sending me a ballot so late? They open it up. It has 1 item on it. They've been checked out of politics since November 6th. And then they get down to the section by John West, and it just says, I want to stand before the voters and I'm not going to resign. And that was that. And that was something that, he told me afterwards that he didn't know what he didn't know. And, lesson learned for future recalls is that letter of justification should have a bullet point, item by item, the 6 allegations, and then make the case of why I was elected 2 years ago was to cut out the wasteful spending and to fund the sheriff's office with a minimum of property tax increases and fee increases. That's what I'm doing now. That's why they're mad. And then please vote no on the recall. But he didn't know that. Nobody else knew that. you just get your ballot, and if you're plugged in like us, maybe you watched 8 hours of videos and are up to speed on this. But 95% of the voters didn't do that. I mean, realistically, they get that, and there's like this brain fog because they remember John West running for office and what he's doing, and then you read these 6 allegations. I mean, some of which, if not all of them, arguably, have been proven to either be a political decision that could have gone either way, and it was made by the Board of Commissioners, not by John West.
Yes.
But the people read that in their ballot. That's their voter's guide, and that's what guided the voters. So some of them just said, I don't know, I'm just not going to vote because I know John's a good guy, but look what I'm reading here.
Yeah.
I got to go to the mall. I got to go down and, Home Depot and buy myself a Christmas present.
I read that, by the way. You guys did too, but I read that in the voters pamphlet, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that looks really weak. I didn't realize the backstory here. I've never heard that before, and he didn't really realize that he thought he was just answering a question. Didn't really realize maybe that was the place to make your case. But I would think you probably should know that. I mean, but
How
if you don't know
that, I mean, in other words, you're only going to get coached by the people that have been in politics or in office that would know the ins and outs of recall elections. And he thought if he ran a campaign and let the people know, that it would be like it was 2 years ago. I checked, and it's within. I believe he got more votes 2 years ago than the total number of votes for this recall election.
Interesting. Okay.
So the vast majority of his supporters didn't bother to vote, because I know 10,000 people didn't move out of Josephine County in the last 2 years.
Okay, I want to get into, and I will hold it for the moment, I want to get into more what can be done in the future to make the case to the voters, kind of thing. But I didn't want to let one thing go by without just talking about it a little bit. And that is this idea that Republicans, conservative people, don't like politics, don't like being involved in government by nature, right? By nature, we are small government people who like to get things done and do productive things with our lives. So there's a natural problem there, because there's a lot of people on the left who like being involved in a bureaucracy, like making, if I can say, maybe easy money to some extent, like the whole apparatus of government, and thinks it's a great way of kind of keeping the bad capitalists from taking over the world, kind of thing. How do we get around that? And maybe, I mean, I know Trump's doing it on a level now. We're kind of appealing to people to get involved who weren't involved, because we got a country to save here, as they say. Well, how do we promote this better?
I think that it is analogous to this circumstance. What happened to Trump? All the charges, all the indictments, all of that stuff. It's very, very similar. But there's one thing that Trump did that John West did not do, and that is directly connect with people. I mean, Trump had these large, events, sometimes 2 or 3 of them a day, and was, and so people could see him and get a chance to like him, and that is something going forward. I mean, listen, this is a very difficult thing. Trump didn't become who he was overnight, or it's been 2 years since John West's in politics. I think it takes years to develop the type of instincts to know how to manage some of it. Listen, there isn't a politician alive besides Trump that could have held up to what he held up to and come out victorious. So
I agree, but so maybe going forward, whoever the people are who are helping out here, can maybe start to coach candidates in a way of realizing this is the reality now. Even if you came from outside of politics, especially if you came from outside of politics, here's the reality of being in a campaign and in office, because now you can get a recall. You must communicate with the people. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry. If I could speak to that, because I've spent a lot of time directly coaching politicians
Yes.
over the years,
Yes.
and they have to be willing to listen. Most politicians usually have to get really knocked around pretty heavily, by a huge defeat or something else before they're really willing to listen. The last time we had a successful recall of a commissioner was Sandy Casanelli, and I was involved with that. She was also someone that would not listen to any advice, and really, though she was doing a lot of good things on the board of commissioners, she fought with everybody she ever came in contact with. She wasn't a people person, and she wasn't interested in being a people person.
You have to be a people person to. If you're not, you have to at least fake it. If you're in politics,
one would think, but she was successfully recalled without any real clear reason why. It was more of she couldn't get along with people, and she made enemies on the inside with government workers, mainly, and that really brought her down fast because she didn't know how to communicate properly that way. John is somebody who I know is going to come back fighting and do something, and I'm not sure. I've gotten mixed um, signals from different people. Does he have the ability to run? I don't know the rules as far as this comes. Can he run again for commissioner, or is he banned from running?
Oh no, I assume that he can, in the same way that Rob Pell was not barred from. He was recalled from the city council back in.
Yeah, it's different rules for the city, though. I was just
Okay.
curious if the
Yeah,
county,
I don't know.
if the same rules applied for the county. If he could, I've been told that he can and is probably planning on it. And I don't think he'll have trouble getting back in. You look at what another situation at the city, the last failed recall that happened was the recall of the mayor.
Yeah.
And in that situation, you had really a good chunk of people come out and say no against the recall. And then in a very short period of time, elect her out of office by a very large amount.
Yes.
And so one does not necessarily equal the other. Special elections are like this type of game in politics that if you're able to squeak through and make it happen, you've got a whole lot of advantage. And the whole idea is making a very clear case louder than you would even during a general or other form of election, in which you're really getting it out there, and you're making a science out of getting out the vote. Getting out the vote in politics is a science unto itself. If you did nothing else but just learn how to handle those last 72 hours in politics, you can take over any situation. And we haven't really done that around here because we've had the advantage of really popular Republican Party this last time around, and all these really well done things done at the county level with the Republican Party. And I mean,
it didn't hurt at all that homeless. I'm using air quotes here. Are inundating the streets of Grants Pass, and if you wanted to put some sort of a ratio to it, kind people say 80% of them are drug addicts. I think it's more in the 90-point range.
Okay.
But the city is sick and tired of it. So even the most liberal amongst, Grants Pass voters voted to ixnay the existing council, and good for them. But I think that was more powerful than anything that anybody did to make it happen.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be getting a little bit into that too, but just to finish this point off, what you're talking about, Brian, it would be interesting if John West got recalled and then got back in. Would be very interesting. It would also be very interesting if he got recalled and the guy that gets appointed, somebody has to be appointed to his seat, right? Which is appointed, I believe, by the two other guys who were there. What if they, I've talked with Mike about this and other people. So what if they appointed Herman to come back in, who's is as conservative as, because he was going to be leaving, or he did leave, right? What if they brought him in? So they recalled John West, but they brought in Herman, who they would have recalled anyway if they thought he was right. That would be kind of funny in a way. And then what if John came back in and then added himself to the board later? I don't know. It's just kind of funny the kind of things that could happen.
It's not. I don't think it's beyond
Yeah.
reasonable doubt at all. Because
I think it's
oftentimes when
likely.
they've had when they've had empty seats, they've placed former commissioners there.
Yeah.
Because they, especially when you have two brand new people, it'd be helpful to have somebody on board that had an idea of how.
Yeah, I believe Harold Haugen served out the last part of Sandy Casanelli's term.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So Herman, from what I understand, is very conservative. When I hear him on Bill Meyer's show, he sounds like a straight shooter. It's very similar. Everyone's a little different, but similar in the sense that these are straight shooter type of guys who has been pointed out. We talked about this, Mike, earlier. These are pretty much self-made men, right? Who have then gotten into politics, who can't necessarily be bought in an easy way, the way a person who's maybe depending on their position and the salary that brings to kind of bolster them. So it is nice in that way to have people who don't need the job, so to speak, so they can be free to act as they need to.
Yeah. Hey, Richard, do you have any? Have you spoken to anybody about Scuttlebutt in terms of who they're planning on nominating?
I don't have any scuttlebutt to report at this time.
Okay. Let me, before I get back, I want to kind of finish with some things that we can do in the looking forward, what are going on now, what we can do. But before doing that, I wanted to say something about, and I've talked to probably several of you guys about this and other people, the idea of presenting yourself to the public, okay? I was thinking and saying at the time, I mean, I love these long form interviews and they're fantastic for really nailing a lot of things down. But in addition to, I would have liked to see maybe a 1-page written statement from John West and maybe a 1-minute video that could be put on social media, Facebook, and so forth. And I think he used to have, I understand somebody told me that he used to have a Facebook page. Maybe he got inundated with haters and just said, the hell with it. I can understand that. But I wonder, I mean, again, he's not that been a politician, so maybe he just didn't know some of these things.
Yeah, John had a Facebook page for his campaign, which is still available, which is fine. He was never the one to run it. He's not a social media person.
Okay.
He doesn't have much of a concept of that stuff. I've been telling a lot of the people that have ran for office multiple times that they really need to be out there on social media regularly, giving their side of the story, video if possible, and just so people can get to know them and feel comfortable with them, if nothing else. But for the exposition of the facts, nothing works better. It's free, it's simple, and nobody's Facebook and a lot of these platforms are not going to shut them down. It's too niche. Josephine County politics, it's not going to get stopped.
Yes.
Chris Barnett is an example of somebody he is killing it on social media.
Good.
Totally.
Yeah. So that's again a teachable moment here. That's part of the reason a lot of the reason we're doing this show. Hopefully this will be teachable, and the next time somebody would be a little bit not caught off guard in the way that probably they were. But these are musts. I mean, you get out there, you could change the election just on Facebook alone, possibly. It's that powerful.
Yeah. Another lesson out of this is that this is just like for all the people that are watching the show, it's like having an experienced businessman, 30 years of experience, and this is talking about John, but you could say the same thing about Herman or Berchiger or Commissioner Andreas Black. They have all run businesses, and that gives them a real advantage because they know how businesses can run, and they can't be duped, let's say, by department heads. If you just have politicians, and they used to be on the city council, and they had a city manager doing everything, and now they're managing the day-to-day operations through department heads. Yes. That also, so it's an advantage, and you want those men and women to run and get elected because they can really shake up the status quo, because they can compare the reality of how things are run at county government versus how it's done in the business world. Now, the flip side of that is that they're most likely not used to having a unionized environment, and they're not used to having to have meetings out in public like it is, because the open meeting laws, I mean, they literally can't like, we're hashing this out, the four of us, but county commissioners can't do that.
Right.
They're not doing it. There's no editing. It's all done in public out there. That's different for, people that come out of the business world. I mean, even publicly held companies, they do a quarterly earnings call. And that's when the CEO and the CFO, stand before the Wall Street analysts and answer questions about the company. But
Well,
that's so there's both an advantage, because if somebody comes in and they've been on PERS, let's say for 27 years, hypothetically, and they need 30 in order to get their PERS pension. Well, do you think in the next 3 years they're going to do anything that might get them recalled when they're making the big commissioner salary that their paycheck or their pension check for the next 30 years is going to be based upon?
Sure.
No way. So they're going to be a conservative in the sense that they're going to conserve the status quo.
Yes, right.
And it doesn't matter if there's only one person using 4-H, you're not going to defund that, because you're going to get a lot of people mad because they like 4-H because they remember it from 50 years ago.
Sure.
When
this is the making of a rhino Republican. This is what he's analogizing here. I'm a little concerned that some of these new guys, because you got two greenhorns coming in there, and they may consider what just happened as a baseball bat over their head.
Yes.
And
I am a little bit concerned about that. And that's why it would be good to have Herman in there training them for the next couple of years.
Yeah. I can see that. The other thing, getting back to what you were saying, Richard, that made me think is, as a entrepreneur, as a business owner, the team concept of delegating and having teams is going to need to be thought of more moving forward by the kind of like the lone wolf entrepreneur guys. They can get a social media expert, a young person who, some of these people probably do it for free, or you can get them from a school or whatever. But they can bring on team members and kind of do, and Trump did this with The Apprentice, right? I mean, first of all, he did it with his own business because he had a big business and he had a big team. But if you watched it, it happened on TV in front of us. You'd get your team members together and you hash out. You have the board meeting, right? Everyone will tune in for the board meeting. So all this can be done, but they're going to have to do it themselves and put a team around them, or build the team, whatever it needs. And especially don't forget this marketing thing. Marketing is so huge.
Well, I also think there's more room for citizen journalists, that attend the meetings to post reports on what happened. It doesn't all have to land on
not at all.
The official, and it's out there. People should be sharing. Well, I'll just share one thing. The sheriff was successful in passing a tax district for law enforcement in Josephine County, and that passed. And John West and Herm Beartrigger, they put it on the ballot, and it passed, and it helps the sheriff's office. Well, when this passed, I think it was in May, when the property tax bills went out, and people got 12 to 15% increases in their property tax bill, they were irate because it went up by 99 cents for the sheriff, and they literally were in the assessor's office, and they're at the glass wall, and they're like banging on the glass, and they had to bring in security because for a while they had to explain to people, like, look, this is a new line on your property tax. It passed, last year, and now it's going into effect. So that's kind of the reality, the economic reality of that family budgets are extremely tight. And any increase in the cost of government, any increase in a county budget comes out of the family budget. And so that's why
add SB 762 and its after effects to that. Everybody in the rural county is now getting their homeowners insurance canceled or doubled or tripled. And you add this to listen, when you're going to vote for a tax levy, please use a calculator and do the 99 cents per what my home is worth.
Nobody uses a
It doesn't
calculator.
take that long,
But they there's a very important part here that you guys have probably all brought up at some point and brought up by others. But the average citizen of this county needs to know, totally understand this. You have a very small number of people paying tax base here, right? That is actually people paying taxes. What is it, like 17% or something when it comes down to it? Because you have state-owned land, a lot of it. You have a lot of federal government land here, right? You have other people who are nonprofits who don't pay.
Yeah, it's 17%, but half of that is privately owned timberland that pays next to nothing. So basically 8.5% of the acreage pays the vast amount of the property tax.
It's
and
a
those
tax
include people that live outside the county too. So.
But there's something they need to understand even more than that, Patrick.
Okay.
And that's that those are just the first payers of the tax. Everyone that lives here pays the tax. And it's not understood. When you're renting, your rent is going to go up.
Trickle down taxes.
The tax is going to hit you eventually.
Yes.
You think you're just hitting the fat cat. It's going to hit everybody. And in times of high inflation, the worst thing you could possibly do is raise taxes.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, actually, it kind of reverses the idea. And I was saying it's such a small number of people paying taxes. I'm thinking this is horrific. But if you're not one of the taxpayers, as you're pointing out here, you think it's a windfall.
Yeah.
Oh, just the fat cats are paying and somebody else is paying, not me.
Brian is totally correct. Look at the rents and what they've done in Josephine County in the last 10 years. It's dramatic skyward projection there. So
John West sound like a sheepdog, so to speak, for the taxpayer that didn't get out there in the election. That this guy was actually saving and trying to. Apparently, this guy was like on it as far as trying to save the people money, looking for ways to do that, challenging. I think during the was it the 4-H situation? I think that was a situation, OSU situation, where they wouldn't even show him what the budget numbers were. Right? They wouldn't. He was talking to people, and they refused to show him numbers and things. And this guy was fighting at that level that, as you're kind of pointing out to Mike, the average commissioner might not want to fight at that kind of bare knuckle level. Well, and this guy was a bare knuckle fighter for the taxpayer, from what I can
tell. And it wasn't just John either. It was two commissioners.
Okay.
And Herman Berchiger said in all the years of politics and doing budgets, he's never asked a department of government to provide more information to justify their budget request and have them say no.
Yeah,
it's our money.
That's
no.
That's
and he couldn't, in good conscience, vote to approve that because he didn't know where the money was being spent. And again, that was a board decision. It wasn't a John West decision.
Most people don't understand the OHSU thing. They don't understand it at all. We paid a certain amount. It was like $450,000 that we gave to them on an annual basis. But what that did was that unlocked another $750,000 that OHSU got from the federal government, ostensibly for the benefit of the people of Josephine County. But we never got that money, and we never got an accounting of what they were spending on our behalf. And it's kind of a slush fund, as it were. And, people aren't willing to dig that deep into it. So most people went, oh, he's taken the money from the 4-H kids. That's as far as they went.
Yeah.
Then they stopped thinking after that.
Correct. And along with that federal money came the federal red tape, the federal rules, which included the non-discrimination policy under which OSU discriminated against some of the Christian clubs.
Okay.
In the name of non-discrimination.
Yes.
They discriminated against Christians. And so the parents, the volunteer parents in 4-H said, we could fight and fight and fight and fight. OSU, they're not returning our calls. They're not meeting with us. We'll just go form our own organization. And that's the American way. They just formed a nonprofit. They self-funded it, which they're paying the money anyway for their dues for their local clubs. and they just went their own way. And when you lose, the kids like that, well, then it calls into question getting, continuing that organization.
Okay, so
Because
so I'm understanding you right. The OSU discriminated against Christians. They were having problems with them wearing crucifixes and things, crosses in their necks, or on the shirt or whatever it was, something like that.
yeah, one particular club, Faithful Farmers, had a T-shirt that had a cross that didn't have the 4-H logo on it because they knew it's copyrighted and you can't mess with the logo, and they abided by that. But they were wearing T-shirts that had the cross of Jesus Christ on it, and they told them they needed to wear their T-shirts inside out.
So this is the kind of the untold stuff, and it's such a shame that it didn't get out. But hopefully, we're turning a new leaf here and starting to expose a lot of this stuff. And I hope that continues, because that's the way we're going to win, is keep this stuff out in the open. Because I know there's this ongoing battle between government control, local control versus state control, with so much power up in Salem and Portland, and with these ridiculous mail-in ballots that we've been putting up with for God knows how long. You had, and this kind of brings me into the last portion here, Richard, you mentioned on Bill Meyer's show regarding at least taking this mail-in ballot thing and making it a little bit better, in that instead of taking your ballot and mailing it back, which it goes up to Portland, by the way, and then back down or whatever, and God knows what happens in the whole mailing process. It's out of your control. At least have it maybe just a system where you have to go to a drop box to do it. You don't have the mail back system anymore.
Yes, and see, and it reflects my business can-do attitude to solve problems. And then you run into the political reality, which I learned speaking with Commissioner Bearchigger, that voting is under the legislature, and they would have to put a referendum to the voters to change how we vote. But the people themselves could not gather signatures to change the Oregon Constitution. It would have to come from the beneficiaries of mail-in voting. So,
good luck with that.
I don't bat 1,000, and here's further proof of that.
Okay.
That's not going to happen, but you're totally right about this, because this solves a tremendous. It solves the chain of custody problem that mail-in voting has. How many hands does a ballot go through when it leaves your mailbox before it shows up at the county? That's unknowable.
So why can't we? And this is something that used to be done by Ronald Reagan and different people. Why can't we expose certain things, get it out there, and even if you can't win right away, John Quincy Adams got rid of slavery over a period of many, many years. Why can't we put certain things out and push for certain? It used to drive me crazy, for instance, that Republicans would refuse to get on the ballot and even be in certain areas because it was too liberal. Why can't you put a Republican on the ballot and just get out there and promote? Even if even if you can't win right away, just promote the ideas. And I think we could take something like this ballot idea that Richard has here, to put it in the drop box and not mail it back, and just start promoting that and put pressure on the legislatures until they feel embarrassed enough, or something happens enough, or the people get sick of it enough to start putting in other people.
So, Richard, were you suggesting that this can't be done by the normal initiative process?
That's right, because the legislature originally put it before the voters. They did it in stages, and the final vote was in November 1998, and that was my first election as an Oregonian. I went from a Californian to an Oregonian. I just had to cross the state line, and there you had it. But that was the one and only time I went to the polling booths. But I like the idea, because you cut the post office out. They got enough going on. And that way you drop it off at a drop box.
Oh, I love it.
And it could be a compromise. If Oregon was taken to court and they did find major voting irregularities, that it could be part of a compromise. And you get into this problem in stages. You're going to get out of it in stages. And I think this would be a good first step toward getting back to where we want to get to.
Richard, anytime you want to promote this thing, let me know. I'll find a way to get it out there.
I'm going to recommend that it would be a compromise. I think if we're going to go through the hassle of changing the Constitution, we should make it the way that is best.
Yeah, but
well, the best way is no mail-in balloting. Period.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I'm looking at there is an initiative process to change the Constitution.
I understand, but the Constitution also delegates the power to the legislature to set how voting happens. And if they choose to put it before the voters, then it goes before the voters. That's just how it works. I mean, that's why a lot of the shenanigans at the national level, what happens state by state, when, let's say, the Secretary of State in some swing state goes against the legislature, that was like a big deal, and there are lots of lawsuits filed over that. But that's how it is in Oregon. You count the votes. The Democrats have a supermajority in both the Senate and the House, and yet as individuals, we can choose to use drop boxes, and we can encourage other people to use drop boxes, and over time.
You know what? That's a very good point, because in the national election, Trump was making changes as to early voting and things. And this year around, he was telling people to early vote, whether that was good or bad. Apparently it did well. He won, so that the proof's in the pudding in a certain way. But you made a very good point. We even without the law saying, we all have the option to use the drop box, which I do. And I take a picture when I drop it like Mike does and others. Yeah. We can put it out there to use the drop box instead of mailing it back. Mm-hmm. So that's at least a start, and whatever else we can think of, going forward. I want to wrap up with where we are going. I think as Grants Pass, to vote in a mayor and city council member, I believe 4 new ones. Is it 3 or 4? I can't remember, but whatever it was.
I think it's 3.
The Republicans elected 4 city councilors, 1
and a mayor.
Okay,
so 3 incumbents lost, and then but 4 Republicans won, and they were all vetted by the Republican Party PCPs, and that's another aspect of this John West thing, is that there are certain Republicans that feel that the Republican Party, the PCP, shouldn't endorse one Republican over another Republican. They can only do it at 2/3 of the PCPs. So it's a very high threshold. And they're doing that because they're trying to win elections in which there might be, 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat running in a nonpartisan election.
Exactly.
And they're dividing the Republican vote. And they did win all of those races in November. So they proved they can do it. I do have, in part of the wrap up of what's ahead, part of that has to do with the lawsuit by John West filed against Lily Morgan. If you want to touch on that.
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, when the lawmakers, passed the legislation for recall petitions and recall elections, they did make it a felony. It's a criminal offense for the petitioners to put out false information that can be as high as a felony, 5 years in prison, $125,000 fine. I don't think that's going to happen. However, Lily Morgan has been sued by John West for putting out false information. So he has another day in court, and she's going to have a day in court. And I think that is going to make people be a little more careful the next time they try to recall a local official. It doesn't matter if it's the big government people, the limited government people, the red people, the blue people, the green people, that if you're going to put your name on a petition to recall an elected official and drag his name through the mud, destroy his reputation when he's halfway through the 4-year term in which he was elected, and he still had 2 more years left to prove that what he did and the decisions he made during the first 2 years were the right decisions to make,
Mm-hmm.
then you better be putting out facts. And if they're proven to not be accurate, you better correct yourself along the way, or you're going to find yourself in court.
Yeah, that's good. We have to be aggressive that way to make it serious. And Trump's did that with some of his cases as well. He's putting the heat on the media and things like that. The drug, as far as Grants Pass is concerned, the drugs are the elephant in the room here.
Mm.
We absolutely need to get the drugs out of Grants Pass in Josephine County, and stop. And this is what part of the mayor and the city council have come in on. This is what they campaigned on, that we're not going to have this low, is a whole other story to get into, but just to keep it simple, we're not going to have some low barrier shelter, meaning you can be a druggie and on drugs, using drugs, you can be participating in all kinds of things, and we're still going to feed you and have a place for you and things like that. That attitude needs to stop. I mean,
Well,
that's,
I can tell you that today on Lars Larson, he basically opened the show indicating that Tina Kotek is taking a tremendous amount of new federal money that's coming in and putting it toward what they call harm reduction. Harm reduction is clean needles, Narcan, things of this nature. This is how they're addressing it. It enables the drug addicted to continue being drug addicted, and also inflict what drug addicted people do to society. And unfortunately, the city and county have a limited number of tools in their tool chest, because while the city was embroiled in this lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court, the state people knew that they were going to win it, and they passed a couple of laws that put roadblocks in their way in getting rid of triaging the drug addicted from the unfortunate homeless.
yes.
And giving options to the drug addicted, such as mandated drug treatment, go to jail, get the hell out of our town. I mean, these are the options which allow Grants Pass to return to the beautiful low crime paradise that it was relatively before this befell us.
Okay, excellent, well put. So brings me to my last point here. The state level. Tina Kotek has to go. I mean, if you're a conservative, you care about families and freedom in any kind of way, this woman has to go. And a 17% budget she just raised, as Richard pointed out on OregonEagle.com. Do we have, and I asked you this the other day, but I'm just throwing it out there, maybe somebody knows, do we have a Reagan type, Trump type, some type of somebody on a statewide level that could win an election, knowing that as a country, we went to the right, we went more conservative in this election, but guess what? The Pacific Northwest didn't hear about that. They doubled down. Everything's the same, if not worse. They're just moving forward as if nothing has changed with the American people. But we all, I think, know that there's an undercurrent that is changing even up here under their feet. Do we have somebody that could run for governor who is, I don't know, at least relatively conservative, who has a chance of winning? I'll just throw that out. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm always optimistic. I think there's somebody.
Why are you laughing, Mike?
I mean,
that's not a good answer.
It's a very tall bar. Frankly, the progressive promises have turned into a nightmare for Oregonians. Now, whether or not voters can connect bad policies, bad laws put into effect, like what you were just alluding to, one of the laws they passed was the 72-hour wait, where cities have to let the campers, the sleepers, have 72 hours before they can say, look, you got to move on. And they pass that stuff. But the people have to feel the pain, and we're going to feel pain if this economy sinks. their projection of a huge increase in tax revenue could dry up. So they're spending all the money. They're not putting in the tax cuts. Another option that might be more likely is if we had the Cascadia earthquake and everything west of the Cascades sinks into the Pacific Ocean, then Eastern Oregon could probably elect a Republican governor.
He's going for the Hail Mary.
But can we at least? And so, by the way, you guys are reacting. It sounds like we don't have anybody at hand that can run for something like this, or would have any kind of chance in hell of winning. Is that what we're hearing?
Listen, I would say don't discount if on the federal level, Trump is able to deliver, and Doge, which I think is the feature of the second Trump administration, is Doge, and if they can do even a small portion of what they suggest they can do, the economic boom that is going to happen behind that is going to place a tremendous amount of leverage on states. Now, the red states will probably be right on board with this sort of thing, but even the blue states will get drug into it. So I think 2 years down the road, there's going to be a lot more to think about in this realm, and you may have some people come to the forefront to help take advantage of that.
Which is all great, but when is the next governor election?
2 years from now.
So you have to be a year out before that. Trump has to do his stuff in a year. Within a year, make some type of a difference to get some kind of momentum going. That somebody has to get ready by that point, right?
Well, listen, Doge is a limited. This is not one of these permanent bureaucracies. It has a timeline. It ends on July 4th of 2026. It's supposed to be over. And I know that in Elon Musk's mind, he's got to be looking at the government and thinking, that's got to be at least, if not more, inefficient than Twitter was. So I think he has a pretty high, expectation for, taking a machete in each hand and walking through the entire bureaucracy.
Another big element of the Trump administration is that, the idea that a state like Oregon, its governor, and through the legislature can pass a law to make Oregon a sanctuary state where, drug cartel leaders can sue, police and sheriff if they report them, that could go bye-bye. The borders are Tom Horman, if I'm pronouncing his last name.
I think it is.
Holman, yeah.
He is just a junkyard dog ready to bite the ankle of any governor and any mayor. And I listened to him be interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and he said, look, what we're asking is for our border agents to be able to go into the local jails and arrest them because they're illegal in the country.
Yeah.
Not arrest them out in the middle of Times Square where it's really dangerous. So the idea that, and that's something where what is the power of the federal government? Well, it's to cut off the money. So if they don't shift it, maybe even during the first 6 months of next year, when they're in the legislative session, and they have to make that hard choice. Do you want the money more than you want the migrants? Who do you want more?
This is
really, that could really change it for the governor's race, because Governor Kotek is going to have a very difficult decision set before her, and she's going to have to make that decision.
All of this sanctuary talk is political rhetoric, because federal supremacy is very clear on this point. The federal government, they are the ones who enforce border security. It is their job, and it's unquestionable. And if some of these local politicians think that they're going to stand in front of the feds when it comes to protecting illegal aliens, they're going to find themselves with tire tracks on them. It is not going to be a pretty sight, and the public is already greatly in support of this.
Yes.
So I see that as being a fat loser.
Yeah, very good point, Richard, because that's an excellent point. The sanctuary cities people are going to be in trouble, or
Yeah, it's
states.
kind of like this black swan thing that flies in because Democrats have a super majority in both houses. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to raise taxes by $10 billion to pay for the lost, federal money, or are you going to
Yeah.
pass a law to get rid of the sanctuary state? It's like cause a little bit of pain. Plus, if you have the Trump administration willing to back up any local sheriff that decides to buck the law to say, look,
Yes.
I got to follow federal law first. I took an oath to abide by the Constitution and defend it against enemies, foreign and domestic. And these drug cartel leaders that are illegally entering our country and illegally entering our county, I want to put a stop to it because I want to protect the local people. And if they take him to court, he's going to get backed up.
So there's very good possibilities here. And Trump was elected. And as of January 20th, will be will is a funny word to use because we have to get through the crazy period until then. We have another month as of today that we're taping this. We have some crazy stuff that's going on right now. We've all watching it in real time. So, I pray on a regular basis. I'm sure you guys probably do too, that God just moves us through this, takes us through the crazy period, doesn't get us blown up or abducted by an alien. I'm kidding about that, but with this drone thing that's going on, but just gets us through safely, and that Trump is able to get in there with Doge and the other great team members he has and actually start doing real things. God willing, that happens, and that will put pressure down on Oregon, which will be a very good thing. All right, guys. I think we kept this relatively concise, given that there's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'm glad of that. Richard Emmons, the publisher and editor of the Oregon Eagle, and there it is. Everybody, starting with knowledge, everybody should get a subscription to the Oregon Eagle. Go to the OregonEagle.com, get a subscription. It goes through all of Oregon now. And I think what Richard and you guys are doing, your team is doing, is really remarkable and beautiful. And hats off to you, because we have to win the media war. And the Oregon Eagle is doing that. Mike is out there in the media war too. So it's the Mike on Mike show, YouTube or Rumble. Love that stuff. I was able to get educated quite well just by watching some of the things that you did out there with your interviews and some other ones too. So much appreciated. Brian, do you want to, any place you want people to go? You've been in politics a long time. You got a lot of knowledge for how to win, and you've got a lot of great knowledge out there. So if somebody wants to reach you, is there a particular way
I
you
don't
want to
have
put
a
out?
central location for
Okay.
political knowledge. It's
Okay.
kind of, I've been on multiple podcasts. If they want to find out more about
Okay.
me in general, they can go to brianjpombo.com.
brianjpombo.com. Very good. You guys have been great, and it is really nice to have people that are informed out there that we can kind of put in front of everybody together and have a great conversation, and hopefully do some good and get people a little more informed, so the next time something like this happens, we're not caught unaware so much. So anyway, I want to thank you guys. If you want to get in touch with me, you can go to oldschoolus.com, natural health, success, and freedom. And if you want to write me, just write me at info@oldschoolus.com. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being with me today. And thanks for all you guys do. Don't give up hope. I know you don't. And one day we're going to win this. We're going to win. We're already having little wins, and let's just kind of take the little wins and keep adding on so we have bigger wins down the road. But anyway, thanks so much for being with me today. I appreciate you guys very, very much.